Rain poured over the dense jungles of the Philippines as Private Raymond Ray Cooper, a 26-year-old American soldier, crouched behind a smoking jeep, blood dripping down his AR-M.I in front of him. A group of Japanese soldiers, laughing arrogantly, kicked the body of his fallen comrade. One of them raised his rifle mockingly and shouted in broken English, "Americans weak. One bullet, no kill." Ray's hand trembled as he reached for the Colt M1911.45 caliber pistol holstered at his side, the same weapon many Japanese troops had laughed at, calling it the noisy toy. As he cocked the pistol, lightning flashed, and in that split second, 3 Japanese soldiers dropped like stones. The laughter died. Silence swallowed the jungle. He exhaled once and muttered, "Let's see who's weak now." Before the bullets and blood, Ray Cooper had never imagined himself holding a weapon, let alone killing with one. He was a farm boy from Kansas, broad-shouldered, light-haired, and easy-smiling, the kind of man who could calm a horse with a whisper when the war broke out. He enlisted not for glory but for duty. Back at Fort Benning, when recruits received their pistols, everyone wanted the shiny new carbines or the heavy M1 rifles, but Ray got the Colt .45. "Guess they ran out of real guns," joked Tommy Jenkins, his bunkmate, a short, fiery Texan. Even the drill instructor smirked. "Cooper, that sidearm's only good for 2 things, scaring mosquitoes and making noise." Ray smiled politely but kept quiet. He'd heard rumors. The Colt .45 was old, unreliable, and too small to matter in real combat. Still, he cleaned it every night like it was his lifeline. April 1942. The Battle of Bataan. American and Filipino troops were exhausted, starving, and low on ammo. The Japanese advance was relentless, confident, and merciless. Ray and his unit were pinned in the jungle. 30 miles from the coast, mosquitoes hummed, sweat soaked their uniforms, and the smell of death mixed with the humid air. Sergeant William Harris, a veteran with a grizzled beard, barked, "Hold the line, boys. Reinforcements are coming." But everyone knew they weren't. That night, Ray and Tommy shared a single can of beans between them. Tommy joked, "If the Japs don't kill us, the hunger will." Ray chuckled weakly. "Maybe this Colt will save us before the hunger does." Tommy shook his head, smirking. "That little pop gun? You'll need a miracle." The next morning, the sound of boots echoed through the valley. Japanese soldiers emerged from the mist, young, fierce, and chanting. They surrounded the small American unit like wolves. "Drop your rifles." One Japanese officer yelled. Several Americans obeyed. They were outnumbered 5 to 1. When they saw Ray holding his Colt, the officer laughed. "American toy. We use sword. You use toy." He lifted his samurai katana and pressed it to Tommy's throat. "Give up, cowboy," Tommy whispered, trembling, but Ray's blue eyes stayed fixed on the officer's chest. "1. Pull of the trigger." Boom. The officer's body jerked backward and collapsed. The rest of the Japanese froze. That they'd never seen a pistol do that. Ray fired again. 1 shot. 1 kill. The .45 slug tore through another soldier's shoulder and dropped him flat. The Americans regained courage, grabbed their weapons, and charged. Within seconds, the tide turned. When it ended, 6 Japanese soldiers lay motionless. The rest fled into the jungle. After that encounter, word spread through the camp. "Cooper's Colt drops men like thunder." Soldiers began asking to hold it, as if it were magical. Even Sergeant Harris admitted, "Maybe that toy ain't a toy after all." But Ray didn't boast. He cleaned the gun quietly every night, staring at the initials scratched on the handle. FC, his father's, had been his dad's sidearm in World War I. "Never underestimate the old ways," his father had said. That phrase echoed in his mind as explosions thundered around him every night. But war is never one-sided. 2 weeks later, Ray's luck ran out. During a night ambush near Marivilles, The Japanese overran their position. Grenades lit the sky, trees fell, and men screamed. Ray was hit by shrapnel in his leg that he crawled through the mud, dragging himself behind a rock. Clutching the Colt, a Japanese boot slammed into his ribs. He looked up to see a young officer smirking. The officer kicked the pistol away and spat. "American weak. We show you real honor." They dragged Ray and other survivors to a makeshift POW camp, a muddy enclosure of barbed wire and bamboo. Days turned into weeks. Men died daily from hunger, fever, or beatings. The Japanese guards mocked them constantly. One day, the same officer, Lieutenant Kenji Sato, only 27, strutted into the camp holding Ray's Colt. He waved it like a trophy. American weapon. Too small. Not good. Japanese sword better. He pointed it at Ray's chest. Pulled the trigger. Click. The gun was empty. Laughter erupted from the guards. Kenji tossed it aside into the mud and said, "Keep your toy, American dog." That night, under the moonlight, Ray crawled to the fence and dug through the mud until his fingers found the Colt again. He held it to his chest and whispered, "You and me, old friend. We're not done." One rainy night, whispers spread among the prisoners. The Japanese were planning to move them north, deeper into occupied territory. They all knew what that meant. Death marches. Ray gathered 3 men: Tommy, Sergeant Harris, and Corporal Dela Cruz, a Filipino scout. "We can't survive another march," Harris said. Ray nodded. "Then we don't march. We escape." They decided to break out at dawn. During the morning food run, Ray loaded the Colt with a few bullets he'd scavenged from a dead soldier weeks earlier. Only 4 rounds. 4 chances. He looked at Tommy. "We make every shot count." As the sun rose, mist hugged the ground. Guards opened the gates to bring in breakfast, watery rice. Ray gave the signal. Harris lunged at one guard. Dela Cruz tackled another, and Ray pulled the Colt. The first guard fell instantly. 1 shot. 1 drop. The second turned and shouted, "Bacchiaro." "Fool." Ray fired again, straight through the neck. Tommy grabbed the fallen rifle and sprayed the rest. Chaos erupted. The prisoners broke through the bamboo fence, running for the jungle as bullets whizzed past. Ray limped, clutching his wound. But the Colt never left his hand. They ran for hours through mud and thorns until they reached a river. Ray collapsed beside a rock, breathing hard. "We made it," Tommy gasped, laughing, but Ray's face turned pale. He looked down. His leg was bleeding badly. Dela Cruz tore his sleeve and tied it around the wound. "You saved us, my friend. That gun, maybe it has spirit." Ray smiled faintly. "Not spirit, just trust." For days, they hid in the jungle, surviving on rainwater and coconuts. But the Japanese were hunting them. One night, they heard voices. Kenji Sato and his squad were near, through the foliage. Ray saw the gleam of swords and rifles. He whispered, "We take them quietly. No noise." But Tommy, hungry and exhausted, stepped on a twig. Crack. The jungle erupted with shouts. "America Jean! Shoot them!" Bullets tore through the trees. Ray raised the Colt. Boom. Headshot. Another shot. Boom. Shoulder hit. 2 soldiers dropped. Kenji ducked behind a tree, shouting in fury. Ray crawled closer, his last bullet chambered. He aimed, but his hand shook. Kenji burst out of the brush, sword raised high. Lightning flashed, rain poured, and both men collided in the mud. They struggled viciously. Kenji's blade sliced Ray's cheek. Ray jammed the Colt under his ribs. "This is for Tommy," he whispered. Boom. Kenji's eyes widened in disbelief. He fell backward, sword slipping from his hand. The rain washed the blood away as Ray sat motionless, breathing heavily. When Tommy and Dela Cruz found him, the pistol still smoked in his hand. Tommy stared at Kenji's lifeless body. "You dropped him with 1 shot." "Ray, just 1. Ray looked at the Colt and muttered, "They mocked it, but it never failed." Weeks later, American reinforcements landed in the region. The survivors were rescued and treated. Ray spent months in a military hospital, recovering from infection and fever. General Douglas MacArthur himself visited the ward once, speaking softly to wounded soldiers. When he reached Ray's bed, he noticed the Colt on the table. He picked it up, inspected the scratches, and said, "The M1911, simple, powerful, American-made. Never underestimate small things." Ray smiled weakly. "Tell that to the Japanese, sir. They sure learned it the hard way." MacArthur chuckled. "Son, you just proved why we carry these." After the war, when Ray returned home to Kansas, he kept the Colt locked in a wooden box on his mantel. Visitors would sometimes ask, "Is that the pistol from the war?" He'd nod, smile quietly, and say, "It's more than a pistol. It's a reminder that power isn't in size, it's in purpose." Years later, in 1953, Ray received a letter from Japan. The handwriting was delicate and formal. It read asterisk, "Dear Mr. Cooper, my name is Aiko Sato. I am the sister of Lieutenant Kenji Sato. My brother spoke often of an American soldier who fought bravely and spared others. I would like to meet the man who gave him an honorable death." Ray froze, staring at the letter. The name Sato sent a chill through his bones. He looked at the Colt resting on the mantel. His hands trembled. After all these years, why now? He didn't know that meeting Aiko would uncover a secret that could rewrite everything he thought he knew about that night in the jungle. Ray stared at the letter for hours that night, the rain tapping softly against his window like ghostly fingers. The ink had smudged slightly from his sweat, but the words still burned clear in his mind. Aiko Sato. He whispered the name to himself over and over, as if saying it might bring clarity. His wife, Margaret, entered the room, her apron dusted with flour, and asked gently, "What's wrong, Ray?" He handed her the letter without speaking. She read it silently, her brow tightening. "She's his sister?" she said. Ray nodded. "Lieutenant Kenji Sato. The one I—" He couldn't finish the sentence. His voice caught in his throat like barbed wire. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's been almost 10 years. Maybe she just wants peace." Ray looked at the Colt pistol sitting in its wooden case on the mantel. "Peace," he muttered. "There's no peace when ghosts write to you." 2 weeks later, a reply came through his local post office. Aiko was traveling to San Francisco to meet him. She would arrive in April. Ray tried to convince himself that meeting her was just closure, nothing more. But deep down, something about that letter felt unfinished, like a wound that had healed wrong. When the day came, he stood at the train station wearing his old brown coat and hat. The platform was busy with soldiers, families, and businessmen. The steam from the arriving train clouded the air, blurring faces like memories. And then he saw her. She was younger than he expected, maybe 28. Her black hair was neatly tied, and she wore a modest navy kimono under a beige coat. She walked with calm grace, clutching a small box to her chest. When her eyes met his, she bowed slightly and whispered, "Mr. Cooper?" He nodded stiffly. "Miss Sato." Her English was soft but fluent. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." They found a quiet diner near the harbor. The smell of coffee mixed with sea salt and old wood. Aiko sat across from him, eyes downcast. "My brother spoke of you in his final journal," she said. "He wrote that an American soldier spared his men and gave him an honorable death. He said the man's eyes were sad, not angry." Ray's throat tightened. "Your brother was brave. He fought hard." She smiled faintly. "Bravery and pride are not always the same, Mr. Cooper." Ray studied her face. It carried traces of grief, but also curiosity. She reached into her box and gently pulled out a folded piece of cloth. Inside it was a small medal and a photograph of Kenji, smiling in uniform. "He carried this photo of our family until the day he died," she said. "But what confuses me is this." She pulled out a bullet casing, old, tarnished, but still bearing faint letters on its base. It read, US.45 auto. Ray froze. Where did you find that? It was retrieved from his body when his remains were moved to our hometown in Kyoto, she said softly. The bullet was never removed. My father said it was his shame. My mother said it was his destiny. Ray rubbed his temples. The diner's noise faded. Only the faint hum of the ceiling fan filled the silence. Miss Sato, I didn't mean for it to happen that way. He came at me with his sword. I had no choice. Aiko nodded slowly. I know. My brother wrote that he respected you. But he also said something strange. His last entry read, "The American will not know what he carries." Ray blinked. What do you mean? She sighed. That is what I came to understand. He wrote that your pistol, that Colt, had belonged to someone he once met. In China, 1937. Ray frowned deeply. That can't be right. This pistol belonged to my father. Aiko looked at him steadily. Then perhaps your father and my brother met long before you and I did. The words hit Ray like a punch. He leaned back, stunned. Could it be possible? His father, Frank Cooper, had served in China during the 1930s as part of a U.S. military advisory mission. But the details were foggy. His father had never talked much about it before his death. Aiko opened her box again and placed another item on the table, a folded war map, stained with age. In one corner was a signature. F. Cooper. Ray's heart skipped. Where did you get this? It was found among my brother's belongings, she said. He said this map was a gift from an American who saved his life once. He wrote that the American's gun had the same engraving. Ray felt a chill run through him. He reached for the Colt case he'd brought along, opened it, and turned the gun over. There, faintly visible, were the initials FC, his father's mark. Aiko's eyes widened. Then it is true. The air between them thickened with silence. It wasn't just a weapon now. It was a link between two families across enemies and oceans. Ray whispered, My father never told me about Japan. He just said the Colt kept him alive when words failed. Aiko leaned closer. Perhaps he spared my brother once, and fate demanded balance later. They sat without speaking for a long time. Outside, the rain began again, streaking the diner windows like tears. After some time, Aiko asked quietly, Mr. Cooper, may I see it fired once? Ray looked up, surprised. You want to see it shoot? Yes, she said. He wrote that its sound was like thunder. I want to hear what he heard before he died. Ray hesitated but nodded. The next morning, they drove to a small shooting range outside the city. The air smelled of salt and gunpowder. Ray loaded one old round and handed the Colt to her. She held it firmly, arms slightly trembling, and fired. The sound cracked through the quiet morning, echoing off the hills. Birds scattered from the trees. Aiko lowered the gun slowly. It is heavy, she whispered. Ray nodded. It always was. As they walked back to the car, Aiko said softly, My brother's last wish was that the weapon that ended his life be buried in peace, not left to sleep in anger. Ray stared at the Colt, then at her. You mean, destroy it? No, honor it, she said. Together, they drove in silence for hours until they reached the ocean cliffs outside Monterey. The waves crashed below, wild and eternal. Ray placed the pistol on a flat rock, its metal glinting in the fading sunlight. He took a deep breath. You sure about this? Aiko nodded. My brother would want it. Ray lifted the Colt, aimed it toward the horizon, and fired the last bullet he had. The echo lingered, rolling with the tide. Then he placed the empty pistol into a small wooden box, sealed it with wax, and buried it beneath the rock. Aiko whispered a short prayer in Japanese. For all who fought and didn't return. Ray bowed his head. For those who did, but left pieces of themselves behind. They stood together in silence, strangers united by a shared wound. When the wind picked up, Aiko reached into her bag and handed him a small folded paper. My brother wrote one last note I never understood. Maybe you can. Ray unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was elegant but shaky. If honor lives, it must pass through both hands that hold the same steel. Ray read it again and again. Maybe he meant that enemies who understand each other can end war better than generals. Aiko smiled faintly. Then perhaps this was meant to happen. They watched the waves until the sun dipped below the horizon. Aiko turned to leave, bowing deeply. Thank you, Mr. Cooper, for ending what began before us. Ray watched her walk away down the long coastal road, her figure shrinking into the mist. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing Kenji's last words. You will not know what you carry. What if the Colt wasn't just a weapon? What if it carried stories, hands, and history through time? Each bullet a thread binding lives across enemies. He felt restless. The next morning, he returned to the cliff where they'd buried it. The tide was low, and part of the ground had shifted. Something metallic glinted under the sand. He brushed it aside. It was the same Colt box, the wax seal broken by the sea. The box had washed partly open, revealing a hidden compartment he hadn't noticed before. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a faded letter in his father's handwriting. His heart pounded as he unfolded it. If you find this, my son, then the Colt has returned to where it belongs. I met a young Japanese officer once, a man who saved me when my convoy was ambushed outside Shanghai. His name was Sato. I gave him this pistol to protect himself when I could not stay. If fate returns it to our family, remember, enemies are only mirrors in different uniforms. Ray's eyes filled with tears. He looked out to the horizon. The waves crashed, indifferent and timeless. So that was it. His father had once saved Kenji Sato. Years later, Kenji's life ended by the same weapon, fate circling back like a storm. Asterisk, he whispered. You were right, Dad. Enemies are just mirrors. When he returned home, Margaret saw his wet clothes and worried expression. What happened? Ray simply hugged her and said, the war finally ended today. But in his mind, he saw Aiko's calm face, Kenji's last look, and the Colt sinking beneath the sea. He realized that the true battle had never been between nations, but between pride and forgiveness. As weeks passed, he received another letter from Aiko. She had returned to Kyoto and visited her brother's grave. She wrote, the flowers you sent arrived. My father smiled for the first time in years. He said perhaps peace does not come through victory, but through understanding the hand that once pulled the trigger. Ray folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the Colt's empty box on his shelf. He never cleaned or polished it again. It remained there, silent, rusting, and holy in its own way. Every now and then, local reporters asked him to share his war stories. He always told the same one, not about the firefight or the escape, but about the letter from Japan and the sound of one bullet fired into the sea. People say the Colt was just a weapon, he would say. But it wasn't. It was a bridge. It carried both guilt and grace. On the 10th anniversary of the war's end, Ray visited a small museum in Washington. A historian approached him, saying, Mr. Cooper, we've been collecting relics from soldiers. Do you still have your sidearm? Ray smiled. No, sir. It belongs to the ocean now. The historian looked puzzled, but Ray simply walked out to the museum balcony overlooking the city. The sky was cloudy, but a beam of sunlight broke through, cutting across the memorial statues below. That he whispered softly, rest easy. Kenji, you were never my enemy. The wind caught his hat and carried it a few feet before it landed near a small boy holding his father's hand. The boy picked it up and said, Mister, you dropped this. Ray smiled kindly. Keep it, son. You might need it someday when the world forgets what peace costs. The boy grinned, and his father thanked him before walking away. Ray watched them go, a warmth spreading in his chest. For the first time in years, the shadows in his mind began to fade as he left the museum grounds. He looked up at the American flag waving high. The metal pole gleamed, almost like the shine of old steel, familiar, haunting. Yet comforting that he realized then that the Colt had done more than kill. It had taught him that true strength was not in a weapon, but in the heart that learns when to stop firing. That night, Ray dreamed of his father standing beside Kenji on a quiet field, both smiling, the Colt resting harmlessly between them. When he woke, he found peace, but fate wasn't done with him yet. Months later, a parcel arrived from Japan. Inside was a small wooden sculpture of two hands clasping around a pistol barrel. On the base, it read in Japanese, "Forgiveness is the final shot." Ray placed it beside his mantle, where the Colt once lay, and for the first time in a decade, he allowed himself to smile. Winter 1954 came to Kansas with a hard wind that rattled the farmhouse windows like a warning. Ray Cooper had aged a little since that meeting on the cliffs, but his blue eyes still carried the same quiet fire. Every morning he'd sit on the porch, coffee steaming in the frost, staring toward the horizon as if expecting something or someone to arrive from across the Pacific. One evening, a telegram slid under his door. He tore it open with a shaking hand. It read, "Arriving Kansas City, January 12th. Aiko Sato and Father Hiroshi Sato." Ray's breath caught. Aiko was coming back, this time with her father, the man who had once cursed his name. He folded the telegram carefully and whispered, "So it isn't over after all." Margaret found him sitting in the dark. "Another letter from Japan?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "They're coming here. Her father wants to see me." She frowned. "Are you ready for that?" Ray smiled faintly. No one's ever ready to meet the father of the man they killed. Days passed like slow thunder. On January 12th, the train hissed into the station under gray skies. Ray stood on the platform, hat in hand, as Aiko stepped off. Beside her walked an elderly Japanese man in a black overcoat, his hair silver, his cane carved with cherry blossoms. His eyes were sharp, eyes that had seen too many funerals. Aiko bowed. "Mr. Cooper, this is my father, Hiroshi Sato." Ray bowed slightly in return. "Sir." Hiroshi regarded him coldly for a long moment, then spoke in careful English. "You are the one who took my son's life." Ray didn't flinch. "Yes, and I'm also the one who buried his pistol." Something flickered in Hiroshi's gaze. Pain, perhaps respect. He said quietly, "Then we must talk." They drove back to the Cooper farmhouse through miles of frozen farmland. Margaret welcomed them politely, served tea, and left them by the fire. Hiroshi sat stiffly, Aiko beside him, Ray across from them. The flames cracked, filling the silence. Finally, Hiroshi reached into his coat and produced a small leather notebook bound with string. "This was Kenji's diary," he said. "He began it in 1941. I could not read the last pages until recently. There are words meant for you." Ray's heart thudded. He took the diary gently, hands trembling, and opened to the final entry written in faded ink. "If I die by the hand of the American named Cooper, tell him this. We both inherited the same ghost. His father once saved mine. War is not between men, it is between memories. The Colt is proof of that. Return it where it began." Ray read the lines again, his vision blurring. He whispered, he knew. Hiroshi nodded slowly. "Yes, your father and I served together briefly in 1937 during the chaos in Shanghai. We were young soldiers who did not yet hate each other. A shell exploded near me. Your father pulled me from the rubble. He handed me his sidearm and said, 'If you must fight, fight clean.' I kept it until Kenji joined the army. When he left, I gave him the same weapon. I did not know he would die by it." The room fell silent except for the crackle of firewood. Ray finally spoke. "Your son was a brave man, sir. He deserved more than a battlefield death." Hiroshi's voice softened. "He died with honor, but I did not understand what honor meant until I read his words." Aiko watched them both, eyes glistening. Perhaps our father's friendship was waiting for us to finish what they began. Hiroshi leaned forward. "Mr. Cooper, Kenji believed the Colt carried a curse, that whoever held it would face himself and his enemy. I think he was right. We are the mirror images your father wrote about. Ray looked into the fire, the light dancing on his weathered face. Then maybe it's time to break that curse. Hiroshi nodded once. I came here to do exactly that. From his coat, he drew a small wooden box, carefully wrapped in silk. He opened it to reveal the Colt .45, cleaned, polished, and whole. Ray gasped. I buried it, he said. I saw it sink. Hiroshi's eyes softened. The ocean returned it. Fishermen near Monterey found this box tangled in their nets. They sold it to a collector in Tokyo. It took years, but I tracked it down. The weapon has traveled the world only to return here, to the sons of those who passed it between life and death. Ray stared at the pistol lying between them like a relic of destiny. The metal gleamed under the lamplight. He whispered, "It's still alive." Hiroshi placed his hand over Ray's. "Then let us end its journey." The next morning they drove to a wide field outside town. Snow covered the ground in a thin white sheet, the air crisp and still. Hiroshi carried the Colt. Ray carried a shovel. Aiko followed, silent but steady. They stopped beneath a lone oak tree that bent slightly against the wind. Hiroshi spoke first. "This tree is strong. It will keep watch." Ray nodded. He dug a small hollow at the base while Hiroshi wrapped the Colt in the same silk it had traveled in. When the hole was ready, they knelt together and placed the pistol inside. Hiroshi murmured a prayer in Japanese. Ray added a quiet amen. Then they filled the hole and pressed the soil flat. For a moment no one moved. Then Hiroshi drew from his pocket a thin metal tag, Kinji's dog tag, and buried it above the silk. He said softly, "Now my son rests in both our lands." The wind carried their words away. Snow began to fall again, slow and peaceful as they walked back toward the car. Aiko touched Ray's arm. "Do you think the world will ever stop fighting?" Ray smiled faintly. "Only when we stop teaching hate like history." That night the Satos stayed in the farmhouse. After dinner, Hiroshi insisted on washing the dishes with Margaret, laughing gently when he broke a plate. For the first time, the sound of Japanese laughter filled an American kitchen that once echoed with radio reports of war. Later, by the fireplace, Hiroshi handed Ray a folded letter. "It is from me," he said. "If ever you visit Japan, bring this to my home. It will open our door to you as family." Ray accepted it with quiet gratitude. "I never thought I'd have family over there." Hiroshi smiled. "Nor did I think I would find a son in the man who killed mine." They shared tea long into the night, trading stories of harvests, of lost friends, of how alike the stars looked from Kansas and Kyoto. The war seemed centuries away. When morning came, the Satos prepared to leave. Aiko hugged Margaret and turned to Ray. "I will write to you," she said. "Perhaps one day you will visit us and see the cherry blossoms bloom." "I'd like that," he replied. He turned to Hiroshi, who gripped his hand firmly. "You have made peace with me, Mr. Cooper," the old man said. "Now make peace with yourself." "I'll try," Ray answered. "That's the hardest part." As the train carried them away, Ray stood on the platform watching until the last wisp of smoke vanished beyond the hills. He felt lighter, as if the pistol's weight had finally lifted from his soul. Years rolled forward. The oak tree under which they'd buried the Colt grew tall and thick. Children from nearby farms played beneath it, never knowing what slept in its roots. Every spring Ray would walk there with a bouquet of wildflowers and lay them quietly on the ground. He'd whisper a single word, "Peace." In 1965, he finally took Aiko's invitation and traveled to Kyoto. The city was blooming with pink petals and laughter. Aiko met him at the station, her hair streaked with gray, her smile warm as ever. She led him through winding streets to a small shrine where Hiroshi's ashes rested. They prayed side by side. Afterward, she handed him another box. Inside was a replica of the Colt carved entirely from cherry wood. On the side, etched in Japanese and English, were the words, "Through steel we found mercy." Ray felt his eyes burn. He whispered, "Tell your father." "Thank you." Aiko smiled gently. He already knows. Before he left Japan, Ray visited a school where Aiko taught history. The students crowded around, curious about the American veteran. One boy raised his hand shyly and asked, "Sir, did you hate us during the war?" Ray knelt to meet his eyes. "No, son. I hated fear. And fear wears many flags." The classroom went silent. Then the boy nodded slowly, as if understanding something far older than textbooks. That night, standing on the balcony of his hotel, Ray watched the city lights shimmer beneath the mountains. He realized that war had not stolen everything. It had left behind lessons that only those who survived could teach. When he returned to Kansas, he wrote his memoirs, but he left out the battles. He wrote instead about Aiko, about Hiroshi, about the oak tree and the Colt that would never fire again. He titled the manuscript, "The Mirror Between Enemies." Publishers at first ignored it, but years later it was rediscovered and taught in schools as a testament to reconciliation. That on the final page he wrote, "A weapon can end a life, but forgiveness can end a war. History remembers victories. Humanity remembers mercy." In 1972, old and frail, Ray sat once more beneath the oak. The wind whispered through its branches, sounding almost like the click of a pistol slide. He closed his eyes and smiled. "I hear you, old friend," he murmured. "I know you're finally quiet." He never returned from that nap. They found him peacefully seated with a notebook in his lap and a small wooden carving of two clasped hands resting on his chest. The carving bore the faint letters FC and S, the initials of the men whose friendship had outlived war. At his funeral, veterans and Japanese diplomats stood together in silence. Aiko flew from Kyoto to lay cherry blossoms on his casket. As the last hymn faded, a sudden breeze swept across the cemetery, scattering petals like snow. Someone said softly, "It's as if the Colt fired one last time. Only this time, it fired peace." Years later, tourists visiting the Kansas Memorial Park would pause beneath a tall oak tree. A small plaque at its base read, "Here lies the Colt .45 that once ended men and later united them. May all weapons learn to rest as it does." Children often asked who buried it. Guides would tell the story of two soldiers who met twice, once as enemies, once as brothers, and of a gun that taught the world to listen before it shot, and somewhere beyond the horizon, perhaps where waves meet sky, two spirits, one American, one Japanese, walked together without rank or uniform, the Colt resting harmlessly between them.